Good morning. Today we're talking about some misconceptions in social work. So my name is Anna, and if you are a subscriber, hello, I'm so glad you're on this video. But if you're new, I'm currently getting my MSW, which is my Master's of Social Work from Fordham University, online though, because I live in Atlanta. Last May, I graduated with my BSW, which is my Bachelor's of Social Work from the University of Alabama, and then currently I'm doing my field placement at a juvenile detention center in the area, and my undergrad field placement was at an elementary school. So I am by no means the expert of social work. Obviously, I'm still in school, I'm getting the experience, but I don't have all the experience, but I'm very passionate about social work. So I listen to conversations about it a lot, I involve myself in discussions, and there are a lot of misconceptions about social work floating around there. So let's dig into them. All right, the first misconception about social work that we're going to talk about is that social workers have to leave their feelings at home. And I think that this isn't necessarily a misconception that people would say. They wouldn't say, oh, to do social work, you can't have feelings, you have to leave them at home. But I find it so often in people's response to learning that I'm a social work major or that I want to be in social work. And that comes from comments like, oh, social work, that's so cool. I could never be a social worker. I'm far too emotional. I could never be a social worker. I would get too attached. I could never be a social worker. I would just feel their stories way too much. And so don't get it twisted. It is so important to have boundaries, right, between your personal life and your work life, because basically all of social work is going to be tugging on your emotions somehow, some way. However, you cannot be a good social worker if you do not have empathy. And empathy is you feeling the feelings with the people you are working with. And again, don't get it twisted. Have boundaries, right? You're not becoming that person. Their story is not your story, but you need to be able to relate with them. You need to be able to know what they're feeling, how they're feeling it, in order to really help them. Because even if you are a social worker, you're a person first, right? And your client is a person first. And so anything you do, you're connecting person to person, and you need to have those feelings. You cannot just check them at the door and come in all business. If you're a social worker, you're working with intimate parts of people's lives, and maybe parts they're not proud of, or maybe parts they wish weren't happening to them. So it's so important to have that empathy and to have those emotions, and it's really tough to be a good social worker if you do not bring emotion into it with you. Not saying the people who say those kinds of things that I listed out before are just so wrong, so bad, but I think it is a misconception about social work that I'm a social worker because I am just in perfect control of my emotions and I don't bring them into client situations with me. But really, it's just about controlling them, right? You need to have the emotion, but I can never let my emotional response become the center of the room, right? Imagine being with a client who's going through a big grief situation and you're feeling it a lot too, and you start crying, so they start having to comfort you. Nope. No, that's where the emotion kind of comes into social work. You have to be in control of it because it is client focused, right? But you're a person first. You have to feel those emotions along with the person you're with. All right, while that coffee's brewing over there, let's talk about the second common misconception in social work. The second one is that social work is a job title. This one might be confusing if you've never heard of title protection before or heard about social workers advocating for title protection, but social work is not just a job title. You can't just apply for a job that says social worker and then you are a social worker, right? Social work is education based, and so to be a social worker, you need to have either a bachelor's of social work or a master's of social work, and then some even go on to have their doctorates of social work. And this is because all states license and regulate social work. There are certain requirements that you have to meet in order to get your license, and once you have your license, there are certain standards that you have to follow, and that requires a social work education. Other degrees really can't fully qualify someone to do social work as a whole. Can you be a case manager without a social work degree? Sure. Can you be a social service employee without a social work degree? Yes. But are you a social worker? Not without a degree. And this is just because social work has a national board, right? Social work programs get accredited. There's a super specific degree program, and like I said, requirements, like how I mentioned my 2 field placements. Over the course of my education, I'll have to complete 900 unpaid internship hours to ensure that I fully have the experience and know what I'm doing before I'm put into such a critical position working with other people's lives. If you want to hear more about degree programs, check out the rest of my channel, the vlogs that I do, because I talk about it quite a bit. I'll graduate with my master's in May 2022, so I still have however many months left that is of my program. I think a good example of this that can maybe help you understand what that I'm saying is that there are currently social workers who are holding public office. And so their job title is not social worker, right? Their job title is U.S. representative or U.S. senator. But they are social workers because they have those social work degrees and they have gotten now their social work experience, and now they're using their social worker self to be in public office, but they're still social workers there. So once you have the degree, you are a social worker. I believe right now there are 2 senators and 3 representatives in the US that are social workers. Just since I mentioned that as an example, I don't know that for positive though. I'm pretty sure that's right. And so that leads us right into the next misconception, that social service employees, caseworkers, and volunteers are social workers. Now, title protection would be a whole other video to get into, but title protection is protecting a title like social work so that someone who does not qualify for that title cannot call themselves that. For example, medical doctors, they are title protected. You cannot call yourself a medical doctor unless you have gotten the education to lead you up to that point. Some states have title protection for social work right now, and a lot also do not, but it's something that social workers commonly advocate for because people will call themselves social workers without the degree background, without being licensed, without being held to the standards of the licensing board, and that can really harm the profession. For example, I don't know this case too well. I actually never watched the TV show because I knew it would hit a little too close to what I do in my life, but if you remember the story of Gabriel Hernandez, the story is portrayed as social workers who really screwed up. Obviously, I don't know the story, so I don't know what they did or did not, but from what I know, social workers did not fulfill their responsibilities and it resulted in severe harm to a child. But the thing about that case is that they weren't actually social workers. They're called that. They're called that in the TV show. They're called that when you talk about the story. They were just in that role, in the case manager role, and they give social work a bad name. I guess I skipped over this and it could be kind of important, but one of them had a psychology degree but no association to social work as a profession, and then the other one I actually wasn't able to find the credentials of, but if someone is licensed, then that is like regulated and you can find them. So she at least wasn't licensed, but I know she had like years of experience, but they're caseworkers, not social workers. So that's kind of an extreme example of why social work title protection is important, but I just think a common misconception of social work is that you can apply to a social work job and then suddenly you are a social worker, when really you become a social worker by getting the education of a BSW or an MSW. All right, our next misconception is that most social workers work in child welfare. I think publicly that is where you hear about social workers the most. If you think about child protective services, if you think about foster care, etc. So people think that most social work is child welfare, and if you want to do social work, you should also be wanting to do child welfare. Whereas in reality, only 1/4 of child welfare cases throughout the United States are done by social workers. You definitely can, if you want to do child welfare, become a social worker, work in that realm. But there's so many other options too. For example, you can work in mental health care, you can work in a school, you can work in a police department, you can work in a prison. You can work in policy, you can work in community centers, you can work with Veterans Affairs, you can work with military affairs, you can work in geriatric care. There's so many options, and it's not just child welfare, but child welfare is definitely the one that you hear about the most whenever you think about social workers, or if you're maybe thinking about becoming a social worker. You do not have to want to do child welfare to become a social worker. You can, but you don't have to. All right, our next misconception of social work is that social workers want to take your kids away. If I had $1 for every time someone's made a comment to me about social workers stealing children as I've been getting my degree, I'd be rich. Tuition would be a breeze to pay. But I think it isn't as commonly known that really family preservation is always the #1 priority, and that most social workers actually work in early intervention and preventative care for families so that a family will never reach the point where a child has to be taken away. Because obviously the foster care system is not this great, wonderful wonderland to put a child, right? There's a lot of flaws there. It's a broken system there. It's not great for a child, but sometimes they have to make the decision that that is better for the child than being in harm's way if they are in their family home. However, like I said, early intervention is so much more utilized so that families never have to reach that point, because it is always in everyone's best interest to keep families together until the point where it is no longer safe for the child. I don't know why the sun decided to come out now that I'm sitting here. So a little bit going along with that misconception, another misconception about social work is that social workers just interfere in the lives of others. And this is something where I could really make this a point for every single misconception I'm talking about. This is something where it's important to have a social work education to be a social worker, because in the education, you would not believe how much it is drilled in about how to treat your clients. And so social workers, #1 thing is to respect the lives of others. Self-determination is like #1 priority, meaning if someone's needing help with something, you can provide that help. You can be a little sounding board for them to bounce off of. You can provide them resources. You can give them the steps they need to get to a place that they need to go in life. But overall, self-determination is #1. one. It's the person making the choice, right? So we are taught in every single class about how to respect others' lives and how to treat your clients and how to understand where your clients are coming from and how your personal identities will affect how you see your clients and how you can combat any biases that may come with that. Social work is all about respecting the dignity and the rights of others. And so social workers don't just come in and interfere in others' lives. It is nearly always, with a little asterisk, voluntary. And that little asterisk is for times when someone is in harm's way, right? And social workers need to step in to protect either themselves or others. But for the most part, services are voluntary. People are wanting to be there. All right, the last common misconception that I want to touch on today is that social work is not for men. Now, it is very true that the majority of social work is female. Social work is a female-dominated occupation, but it is not a feminine occupation, right? Social work needs men. Not to say that female social workers can't do the job. Female social workers can definitely establish rapport. They can be a help in others' lives. They can still connect others to resources, but there are just some populations that really benefit from having male figures guiding them. Maybe they need a role model. Maybe they just want someone to look up to see who they can grow up to become. An example of this, at the juvenile detention center that I'm interning at right now, it's an all-male facility, and yet 4 out of 5 of the mental health providers are female. And so some of them really respond better to the one male that's on staff, and it would be great if there could be more males in the social work profession. You're needed, you're wanted. But social work is a job for men as well. So I think it's important to talk about before I go and actually take a sip of my coffee that I've been holding and haven't drinking since making, to talk about what to do when you come across these misconceptions, because I know and this is part of why I made this YouTube channel, is because as a social work major, people were always just confused by what I did. They didn't understand it. They thought it was usually less than what it really is. They thought, you know, it was easy, it didn't take much, I was gonna graduate and work in child welfare. It's just not a widely understood profession, or it's a widely misunderstood profession, which can be aggravating because I got tired of having to explain myself over and over again of, oh, actually it's so much more than you think it is. And it's incredible. Yes, like I said, that's part of why I made this YouTube channel, just to kind of push out little social work information and experiences out into the world. But what to do when you come across those misconceptions? I think it is important to educate and to positively educate. And that doesn't mean you need to go on a big long spiel the length of however long this video is whenever someone says something that's not true about social work, but you can just correct it. Like, if, oh, social workers just want to steal people's children. No, like, and tell them why, you know what I mean? But then I also think it's important to just reflect on all the positive things that you are doing. Don't let the misconceptions get you down. As a social worker, you know that you are doing positive work. You know that you are making a difference in the lives of people, and you know that you are giving yourself to do so. So educate, but don't let it get you down. If you've made it all the way in this video, I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you, whatever you're doing in your life. I'm so glad that you decided to join me for these little minutes. Maybe you learned a little something. Comment so I know who you are. Making YouTube videos is usually pretty one-sided. I'm just talking at you, but I don't always get to know who's watching. So let's chat. If you've made it to this point and haven't subscribed yet, I don't know why. Go ahead and do that before you leave, because I just really enjoy making videos about my experience as a social work student, in the future my experience as a social worker, but there's also other parts to my life as well that you can find out through recent vlogs. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.